Welcome, everyone. It's nice to have you all here again. Today's going to be shifting gears a little bit. We're going to talk about first half of the training tonight on legal structures and how they relate to farmers markets and the reasons behind why you might want to consider becoming a legal entity, and then pairing that with accepting SNAP benefits at the farmers market and increasing access to the market through that. So Erin and Margaret are going to lead us in those two sections tonight, and we're going to kick it off with Erin. So I'm going to turn it over to you.
All right, great. Thanks, Ben. And I'm going to get started. We are going to talk about legal structure, and this is for the market itself as well as individual vendors. And I'm really glad that the folks on this call are a pretty big mix of, manager, vendor, both, and kind of that hybrid maybe that like Sadie might represent with being somewhat involved on the management. So that will be helpful. And just to preface all of this for both of our sessions this evening, the legal structure and the SNAP, we're not necessarily the experts on every detail of all of this, but as resource providers, we can connect folks with the answers. Both of these subjects are pretty complex. And so we want to cover a lot of the basic considerations, get everyone started off on the right foot, answer as many questions as we can. And then, we anticipate that there might be some follow-up that can be had in conversation. So to get us started, I wanted to make sure everyone was aware of some great resources. We used some of these resources when putting together this presentation. And then in general, like you could spend days on any one of these websites. They have so much great info. So Farm Commons is one that's going to be specific to farmers, and that would be the focus. But as a market manager, you will also pick up a lot of help there. The Farmers Market Legal Toolkit can really walk you through a lot of the structure, a lot of the pros and cons. SARE is a wonderful resource. They have much more than Farmers Market Assistance, but that is another great source I found. Of course, the Small Business Administration, which is part of the federal government, they have local chapters around the country, and they are a great resource too. There will be some action steps at the end of this presentation, and calling the state secretary of state office will be pretty much step one once you're ready to really get the ball rolling with business structure. And then REAP, which is a part of the Center for Rural Affairs, also holds small business trainings a lot. And we have a lot of business development specialists on our team who can answer some of these legal structure and other questions. Business structure can be confusing, and that's, maybe in part why you're here tonight. And it's certainly why we're here trying to help clear up some confusion. It's okay if you don't walk away knowing every detail, but hopefully this helps you get a really good idea on things. A lot of those resources on that last slide would be, great places to ask questions, and we'll just move on from there. This was right before we stopped being able to hold presentations in person. This was a small business training in a small town. So as far as the importance of having a business structure, I like to look at these three things: liability, credibility, and eligibility. So as far as liability goes, having a formal business structure protects you personally in case of any lawsuit, in case something happens that, of course, you never think it will happen to you, but it could. Creating a certain level of business structure is putting some things in place to separate the business from your personal assets. Not every type of business structure will do that, but that will be the first step in that. As far as credibility goes, if you are able to get by without a business structure, it's possible that you'll be able to still have even a profitable business to some degree, but it's going to hold you back in many ways from being able to participate in a lot of programs that are out there and get a lot of help. That could be from grants, and this goes into eligibility as well, to get things like, for example, in the CARES Act, with the pandemic, the PPP program, for example, that was able to help employers with folks on their payroll. you won't be eligible for a lot of those programs to much of an extent if you don't have something formal in place. And then also the state will be happy to assign you a business structure if you don't take some steps on your own. And I don't think that's something that, you know, many of us really welcome. We would like to take the first step ourselves. So there are a couple default business structures that I'll talk about. With the liability, there are a lot of scary stories out there. And of course, they're extreme examples, but they do happen. And I recently heard a true story at a workshop I was at. The workshop was about land transition. It was about a landowner who had farmed for decades, and he had accumulated this wealth with his equipment, machinery, land that was about $8 million, which is not by any means unheard of, you know, if you are a medium or large scale, like conventional operator. And he helped a young mother and her kids who were on the side of the road change a flat tire. He asked the mother if she would take her young kids out of the vehicle because he knew it would be safer, and she didn't. And he said, "I don't think this is a good idea, but I'll try to help you anyway." That vehicle rolled and there was loss of life. He got sued and he lost everything that he'd worked his whole life for because he was by default a sole proprietor, which meant he was not protected. And I know that's an extreme example and that's not the kind of thing that just happens every day, but it stuck with me. Like, I called my parents after I got out of that workshop because they farm and ranch. And I was like, you guys got to make sure you're set up differently. So those are just some things to consider. Even if it's not anything of that scale, you want to protect yourself and your family and everything that you work for. So a few more reasons why you want to make sure you are thinking about some of this stuff early on. If you are a market in particular and you want to have volunteers help you out, that will help you kind of pick which structure you go with. It can help with that business succession if you're set up more formally and you want to pass things on to your kids. Some of these other things that you're reading on here now, I don't want to get into all of those details, but there are also reasons why you might not want to choose a formal business structure. This makes a little bit more sense on the market side, not the individual vendor side, but it's fairly common for an umbrella organization to kind of take the market under their wing because they're already going to be set up. So we'll go into more detail of that, but that's one thing to consider. And then it's true, there are markets and farmers out there who aren't set up as a formal entity. And if you don't have anyone to handle the admin tasks and you think you're going to be small enough that it won't become a problem for you and you're confident in that, to be just a sole prop or a partnership, you don't necessarily have to go through all the steps. So you want to make sure you're prepared, but there are times that you might decide not to. So when you are putting this together, here are a few places to start. Do you plan on using volunteers? That's going to be an important reason why you want to get set up legally. Are you okay with doing some amount of paperwork? Might be a little bit, depending on what level you go to, might be quite a few. The grants, you are not going to be able to get a grant if you can't prove, you know, that credibility. You can't prove that you're, you know, in the system and you've taken some steps to be credible there. SNAP, which of course we'll get into later, you're going to need to be set up with the formal structure in order to accept SNAP, and that goes for other benefit programs as well, which can really grow your, grow your audience. And then, is personal liability a concern for you? And some people might just say, no, I'm not worried about it, and that's fine. So there's a lot of info here, but we'll just take a minute. And of course, we'll be sending these slides out afterward, and this is also available online. But here are just some of the different structures and some of those questions that you want to ask yourself to get started with. This kind of goes back to something that Ben brought up last night, which is when you're getting started with a business, whether it's your marketing plan, you know, how you want to sell. Do you want to be a retailer where you're one-on-one with customers all the time? Do you want to do wholesale so you're not interfacing, you know, with the consumer as much? Think about that as well with the business structure. Do you want to have multiple partners? Could you really benefit from having that team effort, or are you someone who works best on their own? That is going to make a big difference on what structure do you want. Are you really mission driven? You know, even as a producer, if you can have certain elements that include education, include more beyond profit, it's possible you could fit into a nonprofit structure, or you could fit into a benefit or B corporation. There are for-profit businesses that are mission driven that kind of fit in a different structure. So a lot of different questions to ask yourself here, but I like that it can all be in one chart like this. Are there any questions on this page with kind of how this is set up? You see that LLC is kind of where a lot of you know, that's where the most X's are on this page. So
what is an S&C Corp? I've never heard that term.
So those are different corporations. C Corp is going to be one of the more common corporation structures that's out there, which is of course like a for-profit structure that involves shares being able to be sold, and dividends are involved when you get into the corporation side of things. And then an S Corp, I'm not really familiar with the corps as much as the others, but S Corp is going to be like one step down from C Corp, where there's a little more flexibility in structure. And then B Corp isn't on here, but a B Corp is a for-profit corporation that can have shareholders and dividends, but is that mission-driven type of extra step that companies like, for example, Patagonia is one of probably the most like famous companies that fits within that B Corp structure. B Corps also are, I don't think in Nebraska, but in certain states, a lot of farmers markets decide to be B Corps because of that type of social and environmental mission that they can have. So we'll start with sole prop, and this is a default structure. If you don't do anything and you're one person, the government considers you a sole proprietor. So you don't actually have to take any steps to be a sole prop, but you can, especially if there is a certain name that you want and you want to make sure it's yours and yours alone, you can register that trade name with the state. As the name kind of defaults to, it's a single owner. This is a for-profit structure. It's easy and fast to establish. It doesn't actually cost anything to get set up because it is by default, you get this anyway. But you still have to get any applicable, permits or licenses depending on what you are producing. So that's kind of a separate matter. There is a catch, which is, what we've talked about so far is that you are personally liable if something happens. Your assets are one and the same as the business assets. So it's a nice structure to start with, and you can definitely upgrade later as you move along in your business. So there's nothing wrong with starting out this way, but it is something you want to keep in mind, that liability as your business grows. So with taxes, because it's one and the same, the government does not see a difference between you and your business. So those taxes are going to be all trickle down to you, pass through, I guess they say. Oh, so here's a personal example from my life. I almost forgot about this slide. Great. So several years ago, my husband and I started this company called Seriously. And it seriously stood for Schoenberg Refrigerated Services, LOLs, YOLO. And I've only told like 5 people that ever. So now you guys are in, you're in. And we decided just to do it as a sole prop, because even though there were 2 of us, we were like, it's going to be so simple just to do sole prop. We also know that it's possible that Seriously name might be taken already, or someone might take it soon because it's just some, you know, silly little word that people use. So we registered it right away. So when we did that, we kind of got on the books as being a sole prop. It was very easy to do our taxes this way, to keep track of other records. We knew that at some point, if we really grew the business and wanted to do it for a long time, and, you know, buy multiple trucks and have multiple employees, you know, that increases our liability. So we absolutely would have upgraded to an LLC had we kept along that path. But as you can see from this like picture below with the truck getting towed, I mean, like, it was not the type of business that we decided we wanted to like turn our lives over to. It was fun for a few years, but ultimately we ended up not going forward. So at that point, we were happy that we made that decision to kind of start out simple. So that would be one example. Other examples would be, you know, someone who has 10 apple trees in their backyard, and they harvest those apples and they take them to the market. They never registered with the Secretary of State. They never said, hey, here's my business plan. I want to be a such and such. But by default, because they owned and operated a business and they were one person, they are a sole proprietor. At the end of the year, with what income that they made, they would include that on their personal, you know, taxes when they did those in the spring or in the summer, as sometimes taxes are now done by. So that would be a little example of the sole prop. Partnership is like one step up. It's basically a sole proprietorship, except with 2 or more people. So it's also a for-profit structure. A lot of like spouses are in partnerships, for example. That would be one example. Again, it's easy to form. You don't even have to create any type of agreement. It's just that default structure. Again, the taxes pass through to the individual participants in the partnership, and you are personally liable for anything major that happened. But in order to reduce some of that liability, 2 things you can do if this type of structure appeals to you is make sure to get insurance and have an agreement, which is like a contract with your partner. And so those are 2 things that mean, yes, ultimately you could still be held liable and your personal assets could be on the line. Insurance is going to greatly help with that. And having a contract with the person you're working with is also really going to help. So an example of this would be the Darlin Reds. Margaret and I like point down because on my screen she's below me, but I don't know where she is for you. But she and I, this was a decade or so ago, I don't know, we decided to start a vegetable farm together. We decided to create a formal agreement. And I think this was just because we were kind of in the know as far as working for a training farm, and we knew there was a process to go about this, and we didn't want the government telling us, hey, you guys are a partnership. We wanted to take that first step and go through the process. So we found a template online that is a partnership agreement. This is the type of thing that's really easy to find, and we can help with that if you're having any trouble. We filled it out. We made sure that it said each of us were 50-50 partners. And that gave us some peace of mind that we were in it together 50-50. Whereas, and we never had, I mean, wouldn't it be awkward if we had issues? And I like talked about some of that now, but we never had issues. We never had those problems. We didn't like, you know, fight and break up in our partnership. But if that would have happened, we would have had a little extra like safety there that we had gone through this official process. So it's a good idea to do that. As far as taxes went, for the most part, we were able just to each individually fill that out as we were filling out our other income taxes. There's one form that as a partnership you have to get on file, which is a Schedule K or a 1065, I think. So that's pretty simple. And again, just like with the trucking company, had we stayed in business for a long time, I'm positive we would have upgraded to an LLC, but our business was around for about 6 years, I think. And in that amount of time, the partnership was a really good fit for us. So here are some examples of the liability that you could face as a sole prop or a partnership. So thinking of some realistic market examples, someone could trip on an extension cord and fall. You could take out a loan maybe to purchase, let's say, like market carts, to go around and help shoppers who might not be as able to handle carrying their purchases themselves. And then you can't pay that loan back. Or the wind, we all know this happens at markets more often than we'd like. The wind blows, gusts and tents end up crashing into parked cars. So those are some things that if that injured shopper decides to sue, or if the creditor or insurance company comes after the market or the individual vendor, you're going to be personally liable. And that would even go as far as, let's say Margaret and I were running a farmer's market together as a partnership. Margaret's not there one week. She's out. She's got COVID. She's not there. And I do something silly. I don't weigh down the tent and it blows into a car. And that person sues us. Margaret is just as liable as me, and she wasn't even there. So it kind of just goes into getting more complicated. And I think we'd all like to be a little bit more protected than that. She's already dealing with enough, with her diagnosis. So I know that this is a lot of info, so I'll try to keep moving here. But again, as the IRS sees it, the individuals and businesses are kind of one and the same with the sole prop and the partnership. So stepping onward, a little more protection, a limited liability company is a good next step. It's a little bit more to get involved and to maintain. There's some paperwork to fill out at the Secretary of State's website, which we can list again later for you. But most people consider it worth it. You do pay a fee, you do fill out some paperwork, but you are not personally liable for debts, for obligations. And you can have many owners. You can set it up so each person has a different percent, based on the agreement formed when you get going. So I really see this as the middle ground between the pretty informal sole props and partnerships and the even more complex and tighter corporations. So kind of some good middle ground. For several years, I was part of Lone Tree Foods, which is a local food distributor. And this is a good example of an LLC because there were 6 of us owners. And so that would have been too complicated to deal with as a sole prop or as a partnership. We wanted to make sure it was official. We all had our percentages, down. Everything was taken care of. We had a lot of liability to consider. We work with dozens of vendors, dozens of customers. We rented property. We owned vehicles. We had employees. We were definitely liable for different things if something was to happen. And there was no way any one of us was willing to say, well, yeah, if something happens, no problem. They can just come after my vehicle, my house. None of us were willing to. We were at that level that we knew we had to separate our personal assets from the company. So I felt very confident in that type of structure for the LLC. Are folks on the call? I know I haven't really given much of an opportunity for people to contribute, but is anyone set up as an LLC, sole prop, or partnership? And we can talk about it more in the time between these two as well, but I'd be curious about that. Or if you have experience in other parts of your life, even if it's not market specific. I'm not going to spend too much time on corporations because, as you can see from this and what I've said so far, we're kind of going along like a complexity, route here, and corporations are a little bit more complex, but they also offer the strongest protection to owners. This is when you're really thinking about larger companies, like a C corporation, for example, can have, you know, hundreds of owners, and that's clearly a different level than what we're talking about, you know, tonight with a farmer's market and individual vendors. The B Corp is the one I think kind of interesting one as far as markets go, because like I was saying, that is the benefit corporation. And how it's described on the SBA's website is that it's a business that volunteers to be graded by a nonprofit like level of grade every year to ensure that that company meets very high standards of social and environmental performance, public transparency, and legal accountability to balance profit and purpose. So that's that mission-driven part of it. And I know our partners in Iowa at the Northeast Iowa RC&D that put together a farmers market toolkit, they showed that on their chart in Iowa, a lot of farmers markets have decided to go with that B corporation as their structure. So there's definitely something to it. I don't think we've seen that as much in Nebraska, but it's probably worth looking into. So that's something we could dig into more, especially if folks on the call are interested in learning more in the future on that. So yeah, Patagonia, I mentioned earlier. Eileen Fisher is another brand. I'm not as familiar with that. I think it's a clothing company, and they're pretty eco-conscious as far as trying to be more fair trade and use organic ingredients, that type of thing. So something to consider for some. Of course, nonprofit organizations are pretty common for a market as well. And as I mentioned, vendors might want to consider that too. For the most part, nonprofits are not supposed to compete in the same level of marketplace that for-profits are. But if they do have enough of these, and other folks on the call might have more experience with this, but if they have enough other pieces of what they do as well, such as a training arm, where perhaps, I know there's some vendors, I'm trying to think, I think Food for Hope is one that we've featured kind of in these trainings and on the website, where they might help people who have, you know, certain things that they want to build, whether that's developmentally or whether it's just skills wise. They can have a stall at the farmer's market and compete along with others, but the actual organization that draws money from that is not using it in the same way. They are putting profits back into the training program, and they're able to help bring up, you know, vendors who might on their own then go on to have their own booth. I don't know if that came out as well as it could have, but I think folks understand what I'm trying to say with that. So you can make a profit, even though I know it says nonprofit, but again, that has to be used for a different purpose. The last note on here, and this was something that I had no idea and I need to look into more, but there are unincorporated nonprofits as well. And this is something I could see that would be appealing to certain really rural markets. I think if you are, you know, even of a level of having, you know, 6+ vendors, you probably want to think about really having a more formal structure. But I could see also if you were smaller than that, only had a couple hundred people, you know, total in town, just a handful of vendors or less than that, looking into that UNA option might help you develop a structure to really set up, how do we want to make decisions? Let's run it as if we were a nonprofit, but not, you know, actually be one on file. So something to consider there. Nonprofit's a good choice for a lot of markets. And then umbrella organizations too. I think that's another one that really strongly markets should consider, especially in rural parts of the state where there could be a lot of different organizations that kind of are that parent company in a way. I think maybe even on this call, there might be a couple of folks who have some experience with that. It does take a little bit of control away from, you know, the manager or the group of managers, but generally it can be worked out pretty well that if the, again, like the parent company was already set up, it can just save a lot of the hassle of going through any additional paperwork when you're just kind of getting started. It could be a way, just like a sole prop or partnership can get you started, then you can upgrade to maybe at one point, you know, breaking off into your own. But if you have someone willing to work with you and take you under their wing, it can work out pretty well to meet different, you know, missions as well. Because whether it's the chamber or a hospital, perhaps someone who has this mission of bettering the rural community, and they're set up, you know, to get a couple grants to maybe pay a manager a stipend and do different things like that, it can be a really good fit. So definitely something to consider there. This is not a business structure, you know, of itself. That parent company or organization would be the one with the legal structure, but it can be a really good approach when good, you know, good communication and expectations, I think, are communicated. Because if it feels like an obligation to the umbrella organization, you know, they really are going to want to see what can you bring for them too, right? So how are you helping them meet their goals? Because it seems more obvious how they're helping you meet yours. So I think you might have to make the case, you know, sometimes, and that could be a good thing to take a step back and think, well, what are we here for? What good do we bring? So certainly something to consider there. Cooperatives is a structure that I know that Buy Fresh, Buy Local is a part of the university's Nebraska Cooperative Development Center. This is something that is, I always think of it as this hybrid, but I don't really think it has to be. Margaret, I don't know if you want to mention anything about Buy Fresh, Buy Local's involvement with NCDC.
Well, I'll just plug NCDC, which is the Nebraska Cooperative Development Center, and they are extension folks who are, their whole mission is to help people in rural places in Nebraska explore the idea of starting cooperative businesses. So if this kind of model appeals to you, whether you're a farmer or a vendor who has like a big idea, but you can't do it by yourself, you want to band together with other producers, or if you're a farmer's market, I've heard of like regional farmers markets who kind of form a cooperative of several different markets. Those are things that NCDC can help you explore.
That's going to wrap up this part. I wanted to include this last slide since we'll be talking about SNAP next. Of course, that's the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. In each level of structure, someone is going to have to be the responsible contact. I think we've got some time for questions and then a break.
Yeah, absolutely. Just open it up if anybody's got questions about the legal structure.
No, for us in Beatrice, we are a nonprofit, but we're underneath the umbrella of Main Street Beatrice. So I'm actually our Main Street director and also our market manager. There's been times where that hasn't always been the case, but our Main Street program has run the Beatrice Farmers Market since the late 1990s.
For you, Sadie, are you incorporated in any sort of way or umbrella organization?
I guess we would kind of be considered umbrella. We right now we're working under the chamber's, I guess, vision and what they've done in the past. I've only been in the area for 3 years, so I don't know what it was before that. And obviously being the first year doing it, I don't know a lot. But our goal, I need to figure out what it looks like from the aspect of, since we took it over as a fundraiser, using our vendor rent as, what it would look like, because that was one of my big questions was insurance wise, who's covering that right now. So right now we're under the chamber, but we need to talk through with the American Cancer Society, Relay for Life, what that would look like in the future, or if that's something that we need to create on our own, one of these entities to then, move forward as our own nonprofit that goes towards ACS. So that's a big question mark at this point, and probably one of those winter projects.
Yeah, I think the legal structure as well as getting set up for SNAP are like perfect winter projects. That's the Nebraska Secretary of State's office. And they'll help you over the phone, and they'll point you to their website too, which has a ton of information. You can do it online, but it'll save you like reading every single tab, just by having them kind of point you in the right direction. So it's nice that it's local too, versus when you go to the Small Business Administration's website, it is a huge resource, but you can get lost in it. And some of the things you read might not be for Nebraska specifically.
I've also noticed that when we have vendors, especially vendors that are selling non-food items, the Nebraska Department of Revenue has also been a very similar resource, in that they're very quick to help, very quick to guide people. Because that's definitely a question we oftentimes get is, hey, I've made these cool items, I want to sell at the market. And on our vendor application, it's, do you have a tax ID number? And they're like, well, I don't need that, do I? It's like, well, for non-food items, yes, you do. But they were always very impressed at how quick and easy it is to work with either the Nebraska Department of Revenue to get that tax ID number, or Secretary of State if they're looking at becoming a little more formal organization.
I'm glad you brought that up, because when we think of markets, a lot of times we think of food, and it's true. I mean, for any craft, that sales tax is important, and that's pretty simple to get set up.
When you talked earlier, Erin, about, I guess, unregistered or unofficial nonprofits, are you like referring to them maybe being registered with like Nebraska Secretary of State, but not with the IRS? Or what was it? I guess I've never really, not familiar with that myself.
I need to look into that more. I cannot answer that right now, but I really want to. It was kind of a concept that we ran into kind of late in the game.
I've got a couple of vendors that sell baked goods. That's not vegetables and farm stuff. So should I have asked them to see their tax ID?
I believe that, at least the assumption we've been operating under, is that baked goods at a farmer's market are tax exempt. I know, like, yeah, if you're at a gas station, you're picking up a donut or a muffin, you are paying tax. But my understanding is at a farmer's market, they do consider that to be a food product, just like buying a loaf of bread at the grocery store is non-tax. And so that's my understanding, is the farmer's markets are similar to how a grocery store would operate, with a box of Hostess, cupcakes, or a loaf of bread, which is not subject to sales tax.
We're gonna switch gears here. Margaret's gonna talk about accepting SNAP EBT benefits at the farmer's market. And we've got Jen here is gonna talk to us a little bit in here in just a little bit. Jen is the manager at the Sunday farmer's market here in Lincoln and has quite a bit of experience with accepting SNAP at a farmer's market.
My name is Margaret, and I work for Buy Fresh, Buy Local Nebraska. And tonight I'm going to be presenting about SNAP at the farmers market, and kind of a quick rundown of what's going to be happening. I'll be presenting for, I'm going to try to do it under 20 minutes. And then we'll be talking with Jen Burianek of the Sunday Market at College View, which is a farmer's market in Lincoln that accepts SNAP. And then we'll have some time for questions and conversations. And like Erin was saying at the beginning of tonight's presentations, this is a topic that we could spend, I don't know, definitely 8 hours on, maybe more. And so I'm gonna be moving kind of quickly, and it's gonna be brief, but hopefully it will be enough to get folks started and get you thinking about some things, maybe answer some questions that might have been floating around. And we also might be joined by Andy Vanek, who works at the Nebraska Department of Health and Human Services, and he specializes in the Nebraska SNAP program. So he also might be popping in to answer questions, etc. So we'll get started. To get started talking about this topic, we just need to understand a bit about what SNAP is. And it stands for the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. And it provides benefits or funds to supplement the food budgets of families so they can purchase healthy food. And it serves about 38 million people across the nation annually. And to be eligible for SNAP benefits, a household must meet certain program eligibility requirements that have to do primarily with monthly income. So all sorts of people use SNAP benefits, people who have lost employment, people who are earning lower wages, people who have suffered because of an economic recession or perhaps even a pandemic, or people who have gone through a natural disaster and are looking for ways to buy groceries. Right now in Nebraska, there's about 160,000 people per month on the SNAP program. And who's kind of in charge of the program? It is a federal program from the USDA, the Food and Nutrition Service Agency. I believe it's an agency, maybe it's a division, the FNS, so the Food and Nutrition Service. So that's where the kind of the money comes from, and then each state creates its own application process and system that follows the federal guidelines. So the Nebraska Department of Health and Human Services is who people in Nebraska apply with and receive their benefits and EBT card from. And just running real quick through SNAP in Nebraska, like I said, there's a lot of people on SNAP in Nebraska, and those numbers can fluctuate. And the participation in SNAP, it really varies per county, but I've included just like a snapshot of a few different counties. So you can see it ranges from 9 to 12% of households in different counties, and you can see the numbers there. And there's about 1,300 SNAP retailers, and so those are places that accept SNAP benefits, so like grocery stores, farmers markets, etc. So there's about 1,300 of those in Nebraska. Real quick, SNAP is important, number one, because it is the largest program in our domestic hunger safety net system, and it supplements people's food income so that folks in a variety of circumstances can purchase food to keep themselves healthy and fed. And just real quick here, SNAP eligible foods are those like fruits and vegetables, breads, cereals, meat, fish, dairy. There's also seeds and plants that can produce food. Those are eligible items. So what's not eligible are things like, obviously like tobacco, alcohol, but also hot, prepared, like ready to eat foods are generally not accepted. There are some like nuances there that I won't go into details, but yeah, I would just say there's a bit of complexity there, but by and large, like those fruits, vegetables, dairy, meats, and breads are eligible. And what's an EBT card? So an EBT card is what people use to access their SNAP benefits. And it's similar to a credit or debit card. And it's preloaded with amounts on it. And those funds are put on the EBT card monthly. And that is what people use to access their SNAP funds. Okay. And so accessing the SNAP funds, people have those benefits. Those benefits are then loaded on a monthly onto an EBT card. And the EBT card is then used at an authorized retailer to purchase food. So authorized retailers can mean grocery stores, convenience stores. It could be the Super Target, the Walmart, the small grocery store. It could be farmers markets. It can also be farm stands and individual farmers, or specialty stores like a meat distributor or a butcher shop or something like that. So those authorized SNAP retailers use a point of sale device or a POS to accept an EBT card. And those are basically those machines that you either swipe or insert your card into that you can then enter your PIN number. And yes, in 2019, there were about 250,000 authorized SNAP firms or retailers in the United States, and 2,300 of those were farmers markets, 1,300 were those direct market farms, so those individual vendors. So now that we have rushed through what the SNAP program is in general, let's dive in a little bit to SNAP at farmers markets. And you can see a couple photos here of different aspects of SNAP at farmers markets. We have the market tent that is handing out tokens and also signage saying that SNAP and EBT are accepted there. Okay, so at farmers markets, there's two possibilities kind of. The first is that the farmers market itself will become an authorized SNAP retailer, and then all vendors selling eligible food at the farmers market would then be able to accept SNAP funds. The other possibility is that the individual vendors or farmers can become authorized SNAP retailers and accept SNAP funds at their market stall. I think there's probably, I imagine there's probably markets where both are occurring, but generally it's going to be either a market authorized SNAP or individual vendors. Okay, and a couple good questions to ask ourselves are, why should your market accept SNAP? And it's a good question. And there's a lot of great reasons to consider it. A market, kind of market-run SNAP program means that the market is authorized. So vendors selling eligible items at that market are then able to do that without having to apply individually and to individually get, you know, a card processor or set up a accounting system. The market is kind of doing that. Another reason to consider market authorized SNAP is that there's a lot of possibilities for partnering with either nonprofits in your town or region, or hospitals, or other agencies that are doing work to address hunger and like nutrition and health. So there's help out there. There's people that want to partner with farmers markets to bring SNAP to the market. And, you know, like another reason is just improving the access to fresh local food for people who are using SNAP benefits, because that's sometimes really hard to do. Sometimes it's really hard to locate fresh local food that can be purchased using your EBT card. And you also might become known regionally as a market that offers that service. And also in 2017, $24.4 million of SNAP funds were spent at US farmers markets. So there's a lot of people spending SNAP dollars there. And, you know, on the other side of that, like, why should your direct market farm or ranch, so why should you as a vendor maybe think about accepting SNAP? A lot of the similar reasons, you know, you're appealing to more community members, and for that, specifically for vendors, you're gaining access to another market. You're gaining access to people who might not otherwise shop at your booth. So that would then lead to increased sales, and you would also, you know, become known and maybe be sought out as a vendor who accepts these benefits. And of course, there's the community impact, which is huge. For every $1 spent at a local independent business, it typically generates 3 times more local economic activity than when people spend that same dollar at a national chain. So it's just, there's a lot of reasons to do this. But before you decide to do it, there are some things to consider. And I just wanted to spend a little time talking about like what these two approaches look like at a farmer's market. So the market operated SNAP, it's kind of like, so the market is authorized as the SNAP retailer. And they, typically people with SNAP run their EBT cards at a market booth, and then they would in turn receive tokens or market currency for the amount of funds run on their EBT card. So let's say I am a SNAP participant and I go to the Sunday Farmers Market. I go up to the market booth and I say, hey, I want $25 in EBT tokens. I would then run my EBT card through their card reader, enter my PIN number, and if everything checks out, they would give me $25 in these little wooden nickels that I could then spend on eligible food items from really any of the vendors at the market that were selling, you know, those eligible foods. Then at the end of the market day, the vendors would return that currency to the market manager, who then reimburses the vendor for everything that was purchased there. And then, you know, taking a step back, the USDA or FNS then puts money into the account of the farmer's market to pay for those reimbursements. The vendor operated SNAP is a little different. The individual farm or vendor is authorized to accept SNAP. And again, it's accepted through a point of sale device. And the SNAP participants then, purchase their eligible items, and the farm or vendor is reimbursed for the EBT funds by FNS through direct deposit. So those are kind of the two, what those look like, how those are done at farmers markets. So before you jump into having SNAP at your farmers markets, there are some things to consider. Accepting SNAP at a farmer's market or as an individual vendor is not always the right move. And it does require some time to think about, kind of think through your decisions, think if it's right for yourself, think through if it's a good fit for your market and also your community. So some considerations you might want to think about are, first of all, demographics. SNAP participation is widespread, but it's probably best to do some market research about how many people in your town or county or region participate in the program or are eligible to participate. And you can connect with people at local anti-hunger organizations, community action centers, maybe the Department of Health and Human Services to get a better feel for how many people might be out there who would want to accept SNAP at a farmer's market. And I'm not going to go through all of these, but I will go through cost. Cost is another consideration. There's multiple costs that are associated with an EBT program, and that includes equipment cost, service fees, transaction fees, wireless costs, purchasing market currency like those little wooden nickels, staff time to run the EBT machines and handle accounting, then promoting your program, promoting your SNAP EBT program can take a lot of time and sometimes resources. Designing graphics or promotional campaigns and then spreading the word. So you really got to ask yourself what resources your market has available right now, and if there are any organizations in your community that might be interested in sharing the financial or staffing burden that sometimes is associated with this program. So yeah, just really, I think, Erin mentioned this with the legal structures and umbrella organizations, but exploring the idea of partnering with a like-minded organization or nonprofit or business or agency in your community might be a good option. So there's two possibilities we were talking about: the farmer's market being authorized or individual direct market farmers being authorized. And the good thing is that the application process is really similar for those two paths. You apply through the USDA to become an authorized SNAP firm or retailer. And it's, like Erin was saying, you do need some kind of legal structure for your farmer's market or your farm or business to apply. You'll also need a photo ID and social security number, any applicable business licenses. You'll need to have your bank information, and then a couple other things. The steps to applying to accept SNAP, or really like the first question is this a right fit for your farm or market? And that could be a great winter question for yourself to work through. Like maybe you have a vendor meeting, or send a couple emails, put some feelers out to organizations to try to determine if this is a good fit for your market. If you do decide it's a good fit, then you gotta select a responsible official. So this is the person who is in charge of things, especially if they go wrong. So then after you've determined that, you create you basically create an account at the USDA, and then you use that to complete your application. The application isn't that terrible, and the people at Food and Nutrition Services, FNS, are there to help you. They want more farmers markets and farmers to be accepting SNAP, so they're there to help you through the application process. So calling them for help with that application is encouraged. Then you'll submit your application. You will submit some other like paperwork, documentation that they need. So like the copy of your I don't know, I think they ask for a copy of some driver's license or IDs, among other things. And once you've got all that stuff turned in, you will be waiting around for some amount of time. It hopefully would be within 45 days of your application, your completed application being submitted. If they say yes, you're authorized, then you get an FNS number, and that's used to get equipment set up. And then you've just got a couple other things to do, like getting all of your systems set up, and we'll just fly through this because I really want to leave time for questions at the end, because some of the stuff can get kind of in the weeds. So after you've been accepted, you got to get your system set up, and that would be your card reading systems, your currency. You got to do some training and marketing your SNAP program. So EBT equipment, that's like the card readers and the card service providers. So you typically go through some kind of service provider company to get the ability to accept EBT, SNAP, as well as credit or debit transactions. So these companies then rent, sell, or give you equipment and software to swipe people's cards and have them enter PIN numbers. One note is that you can obtain a SNAP only device, so that you could just run EBT cards, or you can get a device that processes SNAP EBT as well as debit and credit. So these are just some examples. I'm not going to go through them in depth. Again, these presentations will be online and available if you want to get at those links. I will say that there is one kind of cool thing that I'd like to mention. You might, if you're just starting this process, you might qualify for a free 1-year like EBT processing service, and that's through marketlink.org. They have a grant to cover some of that equipment fee for a year. And yeah, I'm gonna I would just also suggest, when you're looking at these things, to contact other farmers markets who accept SNAP EBT and ask them what they use and if they like it. You can also talk to other SNAP authorized retailers to see what they're using. Yes, so just a little bit about market currency. This is with the market operated SNAP program. These tokens, you gotta treat them like money, and because they do represent money. And these are usually $1 tokens that are used by SNAP participants to buy those eligible products. So you just gotta have a tight record keeping on these guys. Some markets keep them under lock and key. There's typically counts done to ensure that all of the tokens are somehow accounted for. There's a lot of companies online that you can create these custom tokens for by. So I would just suggest doing an internet search for wooden nickels, and you should have a few results for these kind of like merchandise companies that will design these tokens for you. Let's see here. So one thing I'd like to touch on is SNAP training. Like so many other things, the SNAP program is simple and complex. It does require some training, especially, you know, it is the responsibility of the applicant or responsible party to make sure everyone knows how their system works and knows what are eligible items and what are not. If you are selling, or if you're using these tokens or SNAP funds to buy non-eligible items, you can get penalized for that. So you just want to make sure that all of your vendors and, you know, market staff or employees and volunteers know some of those requirements of the program. And just real quick here, these are some ideas about funding a SNAP EBT program. You could do it through vendor fees, you know, shopper donations. There's sponsorships and partnerships that you can kind of lean into. Some markets charge a transaction fee for credit or debit cards, and they use that to fund a SNAP program. You can do fundraising events like merchandise sales. Crowdfunding like GoFundMe is also an option. So there's a lot of ways to fund a SNAP program. And then I hate to rush through this because these are also important, but marketing a SNAP EBT program is huge. You've gone through all these hoops, and you gotta let people know that you offer this awesome service. So you gotta spread that word somehow. You can do that through incentive programs like Double Up Food Bucks, which basically doubles people's amount that they receive to buy fresh fruits and vegetables. Do it with signage, again with partnering and market events, local TV and radio. These are all ideas about marketing that program. And with that, these are some links. That's it for me. And I would love to move on to our interview with Jen Burianek of the Sunday Farmers Market at College View to ask her a couple questions about how they do it there. Thank you so much for coming and talking to us about the market. I was hoping could you just, for the folks who don't know, could you describe the Sunday Farmers Market a bit?
Yeah, sure thing. So the Sunday Farmers Market is located off of 48th and Prescott Streets in Lincoln, Nebraska. So that's the College View neighborhood. We are open from 10 to 2. We starts the last week in April and we go through the last week in October. So we have a pretty long season. And then we also do Holiday Harvest Farmers Market, which is in November and December. Let's see. I know, Margaret, you had asked that I talk about the legal structure of our market. And so we are a nonprofit. We didn't start that way. We started in 2005 and then became a nonprofit in 2008. And before we were located at our current location, we were the Old Cheney Road Farmers Market. And so we didn't move to our current location and change our name until 2018.
Great. And how many, can you describe like how many staff or volunteers are at the market / like how many vendors, what are those numbers?
Yeah. So there are 2 part-time staff, myself and an assistant market manager. And then we have about 8 rotating volunteers, including Margaret. Thank you, Margaret. We honestly couldn't do it without the volunteers. They're essential for us running our market booth and also setting up and tearing down. There are lots of moving pieces, as you all know. As far as vendors in a typical market season, we have about 50. COVID, we're closer to 40. So we definitely had some dropout at the beginning of the season because of those type of concerns. So we're a little less than normal. As far as customers at the market, right? Generally, we're about 2,400, and we count adults, right? So we're not counting kids, but this year we're closer to 1,700 adults at our market. So.
And I can, like, the vendors there are just like, they're diverse. There's food, there's bread, there's veggies, cheese, all that good stuff.
The board is really focused on trying to keep it a farmer's market, right? And so we have a minimum threshold of farmers that are required. We don't allow craft vendors. There are some farmers who are processing products that kind of turn into crafty things, like fallen tree branches into butcher blocks and things like that. So there's a little bit of some exceptions, but yeah, we're a true farmers market. So I think that's really the emphasis of the market.
That's great. Could you just spend a couple minutes describing how SNAP works at your market? I know I rolled through an example, but how does it work, at the Sunday market?
Okay. Yeah. So much like Margaret's example, so we are authorized, the market itself is authorized to accept SNAP or EBT. And so customers with SNAP and EBT cards, they come to the market information booth to run their card for tokens. And so we process their card much like a typical debit or credit card. So we've got our little terminal, right? And then we provide our wooden nickels or our tokens for them for their given amount. So then they shop the market and they give the tokens to the vendors that are selling eligible goods. Let me see if I need to take a step back, but I think that's good. Then we actually ask the vendors to collect at least $30 of value in tokens before they turn them into us. So it's not necessarily an everyday. And part of that is just we're cutting checks, right? And so if we're cutting checks for $2, right, it's a little intense. And we generally do the credit and debit card tokens as well. And so they are able to turn in that information all together. So when they get to that amount, they fill out this little receipt form, right? A token redemption receipt that goes through, it says the date and the vendor name, and then they're calculating how many $5 tokens and how many $1 tokens, and then what their total is. And then they give this to us with their tokens in a Ziploc bag, right? And so in this Ziploc bag, we generally would count them right then at the end of the market day, whatever day that is that they give them to us. Excuse me. And then we would fill out the bottom that says, yes, you're right, or no, we've got to change this, it's not quite right, and give that to them as kind of like a confirmation receipt slip. And then we take this I take this bag of tokens home, and then I get to count it again, right? Because then I'm confirming what we thought, and oftentimes the assistant market manager counts it or whatever, and I'm doing that compilation at the end and then rebagging them, because we always keep them in bags of 100. And so I'm doing that to make sure. So not only when I audit, it's a little bit easier to audit what I have, but then also we always take a set number of tokens to market. And if it weren't for those bags, then we'd be counting about 500 tokens every market day at the beginning of the market, which is a little intense. Generally, non-COVID season, I would issue a check through our bank's bill pay that next day. So I would try and issue a check. So we have a Sunday market. Monday, I would actually do that accounting part and then issue them a check, and that's via mail. So by the end of the week, they would get paid. With COVID, I wait a week. So I don't touch the tokens until the following Monday. And then I do that process. So everything's delayed about a week, but I try to be really prompt in general if it weren't for the COVID restrictions for that we had established in our market.
And Jen, is FNS then like kind of in real time reimbursing the market? Is that?
Yeah. Yep. So it's just like a credit card swipe. I think it's with our, we use North American Bank Card. Within 2 days, it's in our account. So
Okay.
It's actually processed just alongside our other cards. So in general, it'll say like American Express, Visa, MasterCard, EBT, and it's just it all comes in at the same time. So it's not separate in our bank account. When it rolls in from bank card, it's all together.
Gotcha. Yes. And then maybe that will kind of lead into the next question is like, what could you describe the equipment or processors that you use at your market?
Right. So we just use this wireless terminal, right? And so it generally does credit and EBT. The credit card costs are super convoluted, right? The transactional fees, the terminal fees. So I was trying to dig in and see, and the best I could tell, right? We're about $100 a month for our wireless terminal and usage fees. So we don't have a electrical plug-in, so then and we don't have a wired system. So I think that's maybe additional cost compared to something else. But that's what it looks like we're running. The EBT, from everything I can tell, and I had our treasurer look at this too when we were doing our accounting, it doesn't appear that EBT gets charged any fees for the EBT transactions themselves. It's just the terminal usage or having that terminal in general that would be separate for the EBT costs for us, if that makes sense.
Do you pay those fees even during some of the off months when maybe the market isn't operating?
We do. And I mean, in general, because we're April through honestly December, because of our holiday harvest market, there aren't a lot of months that we're actually not live. If you had a shorter season, I'm not sure if there would be a service provider that would allow you to have a partial season or partial year rental, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I've heard of a couple that like you can turn your system off and they don't charge, they don't charge you for the time that your market isn't in operation. But that'd be a great question to ask a potential service provider and processor. Well, so Jen, we mentioned training. Could you talk a little bit about how the Sunday Farmers Market make sure everybody's on the same page with your SNAP
Right. And so what we require is before the first market that each of the vendors go through our token training program is what we call it. So there's a document that we send out that also includes an agreement where the vendor signs, acknowledges receipt, and then gives us information about where they want their checks sent when they turn in their tokens. And so that kind of goes through the logistics of our credit card tokens versus the SNAP tokens and what products can be purchased, as well as our procedure for them turning them back in at the market, and that process for bill pay for their receiving their checks. Additionally, we do it's kind of a workaround type of quiz, right? So we're using SurveyMonkey as kind of a test for application of the information. So then we look through and see if they are understanding, if they're, choosing the right survey answers, right? And then if not, following up with them to provide them some additional feedback or some clarity if they didn't seem to understand the concept or if there were some missteps in that quiz, right?
That's a really creative way to do that. Yeah.
That was not my undertaking. That was something that I inherited from some of our past incredible market managers. So really ingenious workaround strategies for sure. But.
Yeah. Well, Jen, I want to just ask one final question, and then I really wanted to give our attendees time to ask questions to you or about the program in general. I just want to know, like, in what way has SNAP benefited your market? If you could just like nutshell it for us.
Right. I mean, I think for us, I tried to look back and see when we started accepting SNAP, and I couldn't find it. And I'm sure some place along the line, there was obviously a line in the sand, a before and an after. But this is something with, as a nonprofit, it's part of our mission, right? To support that access to food, high quality food, local food for the entire community. And so that's something that really speaks to our purpose of being a market itself. We do participate in the Double Up Food Bucks, which is great because then that provides more food access as well as more purchases for our farmers. And I think just personally, it's something that that I feel value in, right? I think when we were dealing with all of this, I hate to say the COVID word again, right? But we talked about not accepting any tokens or not having any token program. And it's something that I fought to keep the EBT and the SNAP tokens in place, even though we took a step back on the credit and debit tokens, because I wanted to make sure that access was still there and that we still had that customer base had a way to access the food that we were providing. So I think I couldn't imagine the market without it. And then generally we have other resources there because of the Double Up Food Bucks, providing samples, talking about SNAP program, talking about those things. And so there's a lot of community engagement and education happens along with that. It's amazing how much of it is word of mouth. And it's kind of funny how there are customers that I've seen for years at the market. And now that we are taking a step back from the credit debit cards, they come to the market booth and they're trying to run their credit card. And we're like, well, we're not doing that this year. We're doing EBT and SNAP. Oh, I have an EBT SNAP card. I'm like, I didn't know you took those. It's like, oh, okay, well, let's have a conversation about this. And so we're having customers who have been longtime customers who usually had cash when they came to the market, so they hadn't been to our information booth before. And so there's always an ongoing opportunity for those conversations. So.
Oh, that's great to hear that. Yeah, thank you so much, Jen. I just wanted to open it up to our attendees to ask Jen any questions or questions about the program in general. I'll just mute myself and wait for those questions or comments to roll in.
Jen, I thought that was so interesting right at the end what you said about the word of mouth and about customers who'd been coming for years not realizing that you accepted the EBT cards and SNAP, which you've also been doing for years. It reminded me of something last night. We were talking about marketing, and Michael, who's on the call now, brought up that it never ends. You always, you might put the efforts forth one year, and it doesn't mean that next year you're going to take that year off. You just always have to keep pushing. So really, that's encouraging. And I'm glad to hear that they were customers before as well, because I was going to mention that I thought it was also so neat that there's just all the access that it creates. Like that customer, that EBT customer who comes and spends $30, I thought would have spent $0 before, like they wouldn't have come to the market. And there probably are a lot of people like that, but it's interesting to hear that there are also folks who were incentivized to come anyway, but now they can really start like taking the extra benefit of using their EBT.
I know for us in Beatrice, in the past, we've had vendors that were set up to individually accept EBT payments and SNAP. Our senior coupon program is very widespread. Almost all of our produce vendors are part of that. We've really struggled to, I guess, determine how we want to handle EBT and SNAP. It's definitely a desire, but every time we've kind of done the cost analysis, and we're not, we're okay if we could just break even, or and I shouldn't say us, being the umbrella, but even if our, as a market as a whole could just somewhat break even on it. And we've really struggled to come to that. We do know we have people that attend the market on a weekly basis that are regulars that certainly do utilize EBT. In the past, when we advertised that we had that, and we had just a couple vendors that accepted it, we had on average 3 to 4 customers a week. And I think we averaged less than $20 worth of sales of produce, of eligible items a week. And we thought, man, even if we can double that or triple that, our cost in buying the equipment and the maintenance fees and all of that just, really, really did concern us, because our market has an annual budget of around $3,000. And if all of a sudden $1,000 was going into EBT, that's a huge portion to serve, unfortunately, a smaller customer base. And so we've really struggled with that. We've even had partnerships with our public health district where they were even buying billboard advertising and helping us with some radio co-op and newspaper, and we still couldn't really get our numbers up. And so I'm really torn, because I want to be able to offer this as a service, but I'm really struggling with the financial end, because I know we've spent thousands of dollars over the last few years and just really haven't seen a return for the vendors themselves that used to accept that. And so I definitely appreciate all of you guys putting this together tonight, because it's offered another, I guess, opportunity for us to explore it, but definitely have some concerns on the financial side.
Yeah, those are definitely legit concerns, and like it's often the reality that it might take several years, it might take a decade to like see that that participation kind of like catch up with the amount of funds you're using. Yeah, and I guess I've seen just the examples that I've seen have been pretty heavily reliant on like long-term sponsorships, mm-hmm. or partnerships. I don't know if anybody else has anything to add to that point.
And I should have added, a couple of years ago, we were kind of part of a pilot program for Double Up food bucks into rural areas. But the problem with the pilot program is they weren't able to offer us any assistance on the processing equipment. And so, and we, at that time, we had vendors that had invested their own money into being able to have EBT. And so we as a market did not really, since we had such a small customer pool, did not want to try to push those vendors that had made an investment out with the market trying to do it. Plus, from a time perspective, just that wasn't as manageable. It could have been done, but it was going to be a hardship. And so that was another challenge, but they refused to allow us to just use our individual vendors to be a part of the Double Up program. It was kind of an all or nothing. It was either the market or nothing. And so that ended up, posing some challenges also. But we definitely saw that if we could be part of the Double Up program, and unfortunately in Nebraska, it's only limited right now to Douglas, Sarpy, and Lancaster County. If we could get that better expanded, it would provide further incentive, I guess.
Yeah, I'll just step in here quick, and then I think maybe Jen's got something to add to it. But Michael, I do know that Extension in the last week has been awarded a national US GusNIP grant that they're called, which funds the Double Up Food Bucks program. So partnering with Nebraska Community Foundation specifically to expand outside of the Lincoln and Omaha areas into rural Nebraska. So more to come on that. Anybody that's interested, I'd be happy to connect you with the folks at Extension that do that program.
I was just going to speak to the fact that I think it's lucky for me, right, that the market is doing EBT as well as the credit and debit, right? I think that we would have a harder time justifying the fee of the terminal potentially if it weren't for the fact that it was an overall service for all of our vendors. And with that, I was going to speak to, because Michael, you mentioned the number of customers utilizing EBT. So on average, we're about 8 customers a market that come by and do EBT. And so the average transaction value total, right, per market day is about $171. And it's fluctuated a little bit over the last couple of years, and we have bumped back up a bit. So I think when we, so I thought that might be helpful. And then I did look up where we got our wooden nickels from. And it was in 2018, the last time we bought them. And it was Promote Source is the source that we use. It's just an online, I don't know how it was picked, and they're still offering them. It looks like their current pricing is about $430 for 3,000 tokens. And so there is a little bit of like a leech happening, right? They slowly get lost in the community, but we're still, I think we had originally ordered like 3,500 and we're still over 3,000 tokens 2 years later. So I don't think that there's, eventually we'll have to buy more, yeah, but it'll be a while out. But I wanted to share those 2 elements as well.
Thank you.
With the ability to accept credit debit as well and have the wooden nickels for that, I don't think this has been brought up yet. Sorry if it has, but the stigma can be reduced for EBT users also, which is a great thing, because even though I know at the Sunday market and some other places might do this differently, but credit debit are in $5 increments and they are a certain color. And then the SNAP tokens are dollar increments and they're a different color. And that is probably in part because change can't be given for the SNAP ones, but they can be given for credit debit. So that's why they're different. But either way, there aren't just 8 people walking around the market. And it's so obvious who those people are. Everyone's got them. You know, we're turning into not a cashless society, but certainly fewer people carry cash. And so it's just nice that it evens the playing field as far as perspective or perception goes of who's using that. So just another little perk that can add some like social benefit, I think.
And as of this time, like PayPal and Square still are not EBT certified or able to accept. Is that your guys' understanding?
Yeah, that's my understanding. The market link service, the one that is like they have a grant to cover the first year of processing and equipment. I know that they have like a thing where they combine your Square account with like an EBT processor. So those are somehow integrated. It's not clear to me how that's done, but that is what that is an option that they advertise.
Because that would definitely be a huge benefit to us or to our vendors. You know, for us as a nonprofit, because we get special processing discounts through PayPal. That's what we've currently, as an organization for our downtown economic development, community development work, have invested into. You know, I know a lot of our vendors either use PayPal or Square, and so, you know, that would certainly, I guess, reduce some of those input costs. Because, you know, like you said, Jen, I mean, you know, that's one of the challenges. But you know, we're already invested into a different system, and you know, have been for a number of years. And so then trying to maybe change that or invest into a duplication of a system, you know, would be a challenge. Whereas if we could use it for even our regular other activities, that would, you know, definitely be far more beneficial as well.
We have looked into it a number of times, just because our swiping fees for credit and debit are pretty, I guess they're high in comparison to a Square or a PayPal nonprofit rate. But we can't do the SNAP and the EBT then. So that's why we've just kind of been stuck with our terminal that we're using right now. I'm sure there might be something better that we haven't found yet out there, right? But that's why we're at where we're at right now, for sure.
And I was just going to mention too that, you know, part of the challenge with the SNAP EBT payments too, specifically online, is they're very restrictive in terms of who the online vendors can be if you're using SNAP EBT benefits. And this has all kind of become very relevant in the COVID-19 era, because they actually did allow, and Nebraska was one of the first, you know, in the first 8 states to kind of expand the pilot to allow SNAP to even be used online, to make online purchases at all. And so right now, Walmart and Amazon are actually the only 2 retailers that can accept SNAP EBT online. And part of the issue there is just fraud concerns, and you know, there's a lot of tons and tons of oversight about SNAP dollars, generally speaking. And so that's where the PIN number is really important. So when you swipe at a terminal, you can enter your PIN number, and that's the security kind of feature that is built into the SNAP program. So switching to online has been a little bit complicated, but there is legislation being introduced right now at a national level by Senator Durbin out of Illinois and other, to expand that and broaden that out. And part of the thinking is to support farmers markets, direct-to-consumer farmers, kind of get more of that money from the SNAP program into local economies across the country. So there is a movement happening there that could expand the options that are available in the near future. So hopefully that'll come to bear. We're here as resources. Feel free to reach out. I think you should have our email addresses, but now, if not, just let us know. We can certainly, if you have specific questions, if you want some help thinking through some of these issues, we're here to help with that. And so, yeah, we'll use us as a resource. We're certainly happy to help. And Jen, thank you so much for coming tonight. Really appreciate it. That was really, really informative.